Welcome to the deep dive. So today, we're really digging into the work of someone quite significant in, well, the last couple of decades, really. A researcher who fundamentally redefined how we talk about courage, connection.
And just that feeling of being enough. Yeah, we're talking about Brené Brown's research here.
Exactly. The body of work that took vulnerability, which, maybe felt a bit fluffy before,
Right, or like a weakness even.
and transformed it into something rigorous, something backed by solid research, a measure of, well, emotional strength, even leadership effectiveness.
It really has been one of the biggest shifts, I think, in understanding emotional intelligence this century. And what's so interesting is how it all started. It wasn't like the intended path, was it?
No, not at all. The mission, as I understand it, began pretty simply. Just trying to study human connection, map it out.
Just trying to figure out what makes us connect. What does belonging look like?
But then the research took this unexpected turn. What started as, looking at belonging became a deep dive into what actually stops belonging. That's the first big twist here, isn't it?
It absolutely is. So the researcher, Brown, she's collecting all this data, interviewing thousands of people,
Yeah.
asking about joy, love, belonging, connection, the good stuff.
Right.
But the data just kept coming back, well, messy,
Yeah.
contaminated, you could almost say. People couldn't really talk about connection without immediately talking about the flip side.
Heartbreak.
Heartbreak, yeah, betrayal, and again in this really dark, kind of paralyzing feeling.
Yeah.
Shame.
Wow. So the data wasn't showing how we connect, but more like why we can't connect.
Precisely. That fear of disconnection, rooted in shame, was just so powerful, so pervasive, it basically overshadowed everything else.
That changes everything for the research then.
Completely. It meant she had to pivot. She essentially became a shame and empathy researcher almost by accident. You know,
Yeah.
the original questions about bonding just morphed into this huge decade-long quest to figure it all out.
Figure out shame itself.
Yeah, exactly. What is shame, fundamentally? How does it work in our minds, in our lives? And maybe most importantly, how do we build up resilience against that really insidious universal belief that I'm not good enough?
It really does sound less like a standard research project and more like stumbling into the heart of human insecurity.
That's a good way to put it. And this is where that central paradox really comes into play. The big one.
Okay, which is?
When the research went back and looked at the people who did experience deep connection, joy, love, and asked them how, they all pointed, inevitably, to one thing.
Let me guess. Vulnerability.
Vulnerability, the very thing that people initially labeled as weakness, the thing we try so hard to hide or armor up against.
Right.
It turned out to be the core, the heart, the absolute center of all the meaningful experiences people were longing for.
So if you want that deep connection, you actually have to risk being seen, really seen, which means risking getting hurt or criticized.
That's the crux of it. It wasn't proving that strength leads to connection. It proved that the willingness to show up, even when you feel weak or expose that vulnerability, that's the prerequisite for real strength and connection.
Okay, so that's the core idea we need to unpack today. Let's really dive into that paradox and see how this research connects with, well, other ideas about self-mastery and building that inner strength.
Right, so to really get the findings, we first have to be super clear on what the research means by shame, because it gets confused with guilt all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah, people use them interchangeably, but they're different.
Very different, according to the research. Shame is intensely painful, yes, but it's focused entirely on the self. It's the feeling of, I am bad, I am flawed, I'm unworthy of love, of belonging.
Okay, so it's about identity. I am bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Guilt, on the other hand, is focused on behavior. It's, I did something bad.
Okay. That distinction feels really important because guilt, if it's about behavior, feels like it can motivate you, right? Like, okay, I messed up, I need to fix that action.
Precisely. Guilt can be helpful, adaptive even. It tells us we violated our own values and need to make amends or change a behavior. But shame just shuts you down. It's paralyzing because it attacks your fundamental sense of self.
So when people in the study talked about disconnection, they were talking about that shame feeling, that fear of not being worthy.
That's what the data showed. And the research pointed out something interesting. We often define really deep emotions by what they aren't. Like, if you think about the opposite of feeling truly worthy, what do you get?
Shame.
Shame. It disconnects us, makes us feel fundamentally flawed and alone in that flawedness.
Okay, so that's the problem. How did the research identify the solution, or at least the people who seemed more immune to this?
Well, that led to this really powerful concept, the wholehearted. That's the term Brown coined for the individuals in the study who showed the highest levels of resilience to shame. They weren't shame-proof, nobody is, but they knew how to handle it.
Yeah.
They fundamentally believed in their own worthiness.
The wholehearted. I like that. So the research didn't just identify them, it dug into what they did differently. What did they actually have in common?
Yes, that was the key focus. What are the patterns here? What are the actual behaviors, the ways of thinking that these people shared, regardless of, their job or background or how much money they had?
And they found common threads.
They did. Three core things really stood out consistently.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the first one?
First, they actively cultivated courage, compassion, and connection. Now, courage here isn't necessarily like physical bravery.
Not running into a burning building kind of courage.
Right. It's more about moral courage. The courage to tell your own story with honesty, to be vulnerable, to let yourself actually be seen, imperfections and all.
Okay. And compassion.
Crucial. Compassion for other people, yes, but also, and this is often the harder part, compassion for themselves. Being kind to yourself when you mess up, instead of beating yourself up.
Which is the opposite of shame, really.
Exactly. And connection was the third piece of that first point. They understood, instinctively maybe, that isolating yourself when you feel shame just makes it worse. It amplifies it. So they actively reached out. They chose to engage with others, even when retreating felt safer.
So courage to be seen, compassion for self and others, and connection instead of isolation. Got it. What was the second attribute?
Second, they embraced imperfection. And this is more than just saying, oh, nobody's perfect. It's deeper. Behaviorally, the wholehearted didn't just tolerate imperfection. They understood that true belonging, feeling like you're truly accepted for who you are, flaws included, is fundamentally different and way better than just fitting in.
Ah, that's a key distinction. Fitting in means you have to change yourself, right? Wear the right clothes, say the right things.
Exactly. Fitting in requires you to constantly monitor yourself, perform, maybe even hide parts of yourself to meet some external standard. Belonging means you get to be you, and you're still worthy of connection.
And that performance of fitting in must be exhausting. And it probably feeds shame too, because deep down you know the acceptance isn't real, it's conditional.
Absolutely. The research showed that people who believed they were worthy just as they were, they spent way less energy on comparison, on worrying about what other people thought. They could just be present more.
Okay, embracing imperfection for true belonging makes sense. What's the third one?
The third finding was about their internal world. They understood the power of the stories they told themselves. They had practices, conscious or not, that allowed them to be vulnerable with themselves.
Like self-awareness.
Yeah, being able to recognize when their inner narrative was being driven by fear or shame, and having the ability to question those stories, to challenge them.
Instead of just automatically believing the negative self-talk.
Right. And connected to that, they actively practiced gratitude and joy, even when things were hard, even in times of vulnerability. They refused to do that thing Brown calls foreboding joy.
Foreboding joy, what's that?
You know that feeling. When something really good happens, and instead of just enjoying it, you immediately start worrying about when the other shoe's going to drop. Like, this is too good to be true, something bad must be coming.
Oh yeah, I know that feeling. Protecting yourself from disappointment by not fully embracing the good stuff.
Exactly. The wholehearted seem better able to just be in the joy, to practice gratitude for it, without that constant fear hijacking the moment.
So courage, compassion, connection, embracing imperfection for belonging, and managing their inner story with self-awareness and gratitude, that's a powerful combination.
It really is. And the research suggests this isn't just individual stuff. There might be a kind of quiet transformation happening slowly in society.
The transformation, how so?
A potential shift away from what she calls turning on each other. That culture of judgment, comparison, shame, blame.
The call-out culture, maybe, or just general competitiveness.
Yeah, all of that. A shift away from that and turning toward each other. Moving towards more empathy, more support, more genuine connection.
And that shift, that turning toward each other, you can't do that without feeling safe enough, right? Which requires
Shame resilience, absolutely. It hinges on it. If you're constantly terrified of being judged or criticized or rejected, you can't lower your defenses. You can't turn toward someone authentically. The wholehearted, because they've built up that inner sense of worthiness, they have the security to drop the armor and actually engage.
So it's kind of ironic. The work of vulnerability, of being open, is actually the work of building a different kind of self-protection. Not armor, but like a strong inner core.
Exactly. A core so solid that the external stuff, the judgments, the criticism, it just doesn't hit as hard. It doesn't define you.
Which brings us back to the main argument of this whole body of work, doesn't it?
It does. The big idea. If we're willing to actually dare greatly, as she puts it, borrowing from Theodore Roosevelt, if we risk vulnerability, if we commit to showing up and letting ourselves be seen, truly seen,
Then what?
then that inherent belief in our own worthiness, that we are enough, just as we are, that has the power to set us free. It flips the script. You don't have to earn your worthiness anymore. You just have to own it and show up.
Okay, so this idea of inner confidence, this sense of inherent worthiness, it actually lines up really well with a lot of classic thinking on self-mastery, doesn't it? From, philosophy to modern personal development.
It really does. Worthiness isn't just some vague, fuzzy feeling inside. It shows up in how you act, how you behave. There's a clear link between the internal feeling and the external manifestation.
And there are ways to sort of gauge that, how it shows up.
Yeah, definitely. There's a great little barometer, actually, mentioned in other self-help stuff that connects directly to this. It sounds almost trivial, but it's about how you handle compliments.
Compliments? Really? How does that work?
Well, think about it. Someone gives you a genuine compliment on your work, maybe, or something you said, or even just your outfit. What's your immediate reaction?
Sometimes maybe deflect. Like, oh, this old thing, or oh, it was nothing.
Exactly. That immediate deflection, the downplaying, even contradicting the person, no, it wasn't that good, that's often a sign of low self-approval.
Right.
You literally can't absorb the positive feedback because your internal script may be driven by that not enough feeling.
It tells you it's not true, or you don't deserve it.
Right. You feel uncomfortable receiving it.
Mm.
Whereas someone with a strong sense of self-approval, of worthiness,
They can just accept it.
yeah,
Yeah.
they can simply say thank you, or that's kind of you to say, and just let it land, absorb it, without feeling that awkward need to immediately bat it away or minimize it.
So the ability to just receive a compliment gracefully signals that your inner belief aligns with the positive feedback. You believe you're worthy of it.
That's the idea. Conversely, if you find yourself constantly craving compliments, needing that external validation all the time, or if you always deflect them, it suggests you're looking outside yourself for proof of worth, rather than finding it inside. And that reliance on the external is the opposite of the wholehearted approach, which is built on self-acceptance.
Okay, that makes sense. And worthiness also seems linked to taking action, right? Taking control of your life.
Oh, absolutely. It's fundamental to shifting from being passive, just letting life happen to you, to being proactive, actively acting on life.
How does that connect to worthiness?
Well, if you consistently avoid taking charge, if you avoid the difficult conversation, put off starting the project, hesitate to make a needed change, you're sending yourself a subtle message, aren't you?
That you're not capable or not worthy of directing things.
Something like that. You're implicitly saying you don't trust yourself to handle it, or that you don't deserve to shape your own destiny. That passive stance where you feel like you're just being carried along by circumstances, that really undermines self-respect over time.
And this connects to that classic idea, I think it's from Stephen Covey, right? Private victory precedes public victory.
Exactly. You have to win the battles within yourself first. You need to establish that dominion over self, that true independence, before you can effectively navigate the complexities of relationships, teamwork, and the vulnerability required for public life or deep connection.
Independence. Sometimes that word gets a negative spin, like it means being isolated or selfish.
Yeah, but that's not how it's meant here. In this context, independence is an achievement. It's something you build through inner work, through integrity. It's about having a solid, reliable inner core.
And once you have that,
Then interdependence, things like teamwork, collaboration, deep relationships, being vulnerable with others, becomes a genuine choice. It's having only truly independent people with that solid core, can actually choose to do effectively. Otherwise, you're just dependent or codependent.
so independence is the foundation for healthy connection, not the opposite of it.
Precisely. It's like the secure base camp you need before you can go out on those more risky, vulnerable expeditions into the world or into relationships.
Okay, so how do you build that self-respect, that inner independence? It sounds big.
It sounds big, but the practical advice is actually quite small, quite incremental. It's not about massive heroic efforts overnight. It's about integrity, starting small.
Like what?
Like making a small promise to yourself and then keeping it. Maybe it's just deciding you'll get up 5 minutes earlier tomorrow and then actually doing it.
Yeah.
Or promising yourself you'll read one chapter of a book and following through.
So tiny acts of self-trust.
Exactly. Micro-integrity. You just keep doing that, Make a promise, keep it. Make another, keep it. Little by little, you build up evidence for yourself that you are reliable, that you can trust yourself.
Until, as the saying goes.
Until our honor becomes greater than our moods. Your commitment to your word, even just to yourself, starts to outweigh your temporary feelings or impulses not to do it.
And that accumulation of small wins builds the strong inner core.
That's the idea. It creates that stable, changeless center. You become reliable to yourself, and that self-reliability is really close to the definition of inherent worthiness. It gives you the foundation you need to be vulnerable out in the world without getting completely knocked off balance by every bit of criticism or negativity.
And this inner strength, this worthiness, it also helps protect against something else Brown talks about, right? The fear of being wrong, especially when it comes to creativity.
Oh, hugely. That fear of being wrong is a massive creativity killer. To live any kind of creative life, whether that's art or starting a business or innovating at work, even parenting creatively, you have to be willing to be wrong. You have to lose the fear of being wrong.
It's if you're terrified of mistakes.
You won't take any risks. You'll play it safe. And playing it safe rarely leads to anything truly new or meaningful. When you lack that sense of inner worthiness, self-doubt creeps in really easily.
And that self-doubt can lead to self-sabotage, can it?
Absolutely. It's that vicious cycle. You're afraid you'll fail, so you don't really try your best, or you procrastinate, or you find excuses. And then when things don't work out, it confirms your initial fear that you weren't capable.
Proving yourself right in the worst way.
Exactly. So much of our potential is squandered not because we lack ability, but because low self-worth makes us inflict these wounds on ourselves. We push away opportunities, we damage connections, all out of fear. The shame resilience work really shows us how to build up our defenses against those self-inflicted wounds by grounding our identity in who we are, not in our successes or failures.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about where this vulnerability research gets really practical, maybe even raw, our closest relationships. And especially parenting. This seems like a critical area for understanding worthiness and shame.
Absolutely essential, because the risk of passing shame down unintentionally is so incredibly high in parenting. Brown really emphasizes the danger of creating, even subtly, prerequisites for a child's worthiness.
Prerequisites like you're only worthy if.
Exactly. You're only worthy if you get good grades, or if you're quiet, or if you make the team, or if you don't make a mess. We have to be so mindful of the messages we send, both the overt things we say and the covert messages hidden in our reactions or expectations.
So when we need to discipline or correct a child, how do we do that without shaming them, without attacking their worthiness?
The key is always, always, always focusing on the behavior, not the child's identity, making it crystal clear that while the action was unacceptable, the child's essential worthiness is never, ever on the table.
Can you give an example? Like instead of saying,
I'm so disappointed in you, why would you do something so stupid, which is all about the child's character.
right, that feels shaming.
You'd focus on the action and its consequences. Hitting your sister is not okay because it hurts her. We don't hurt people in our family. You need to go sit over here for a few minutes. See the difference?
Yeah, it's the behavior was wrong, not you are wrong.
Exactly. The underlying message has to be, your behavior needs to change. But you, my child, you are always loved. You always belong here. Your worth is non-negotiable. The research is really clear that shame takes root and grows like wildfire when kids feel their connection to their parents is conditional on being perfect or always pleasing them.
And the research also points out how some of the most damaging covert messages about worthiness get tied up in gender norms, right? Those old, rigid expectations.
Yes, this is a huge source of shame that often flies under the radar. The source material gets really specific about these destructive norms. For daughters, think about the messages they often absorb.
Like they need to be.
Thin, maybe. Nice, agreeable, modest. That their worth is somehow tied to their appearance, or how pleasant they are, or how much space they don't take up.
And how does that affect how we teach them about relationships?
Well, a critical question Brown implicitly raises for parents is, are we teaching our daughters to respect boys and men only as potential providers or protectors? Or are we teaching them to see boys as whole human beings, capable of tenderness, emotion, vulnerability? Are we teaching girls that their own needs and voices matter just as much?
That really does set up a lifetime of potentially unequal or unsatisfying interactions if we get it wrong. And what about for sons? What are typical damaging messages there?
For sons, the script is often equally rigid and harmful. Be tough. Be emotionally stoic. Boys don't cry. Prioritize money, status, power. Maybe even be aggressive or dominant to prove your masculinity.
Suck it up, be a man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those messages basically teach boys to cut themselves off from their own emotional lives. We tell them vulnerability is weakness, which is practically the definition of shame. It damages their capacity for empathy, for connection, for true intimacy later in life.
So the parallel question for parents of sons would be,
Are we teaching our sons to respect women and girls as smart, capable, complex people, as equals? Or are we subtly teaching them to see girls primarily as objects or caregivers or status symbols or people whose feelings are less important than their own?
wow, these gender boxes are just soaked in shame, aren't they, for everyone involved? They're the complete opposite of wholehearted living.
Totally. And the only way to really dismantle them for our kids and for ourselves is through embracing vulnerability, being authentic about the full range of human experience, regardless of gender.
Which leads us nicely into vulnerability in adult relationships, in communication.
Right, because that need for vulnerability doesn't stop when we grow up. To have truly meaningful connections, we need a profound shift in how we usually communicate. This lines up perfectly with principles of empathic listening, like Covey talks about.
What's a usual way we communicate?
Typically, our main goal is to be understood first, right? We listen, but we're filtering everything through our own lens, our own experiences, our own autobiography, as Covey calls it.
We're basically just waiting for our turn to talk, or thinking about how what they're saying relates to us.
Exactly. We're diagnosing, advising, probing based on our own stuff. We project our own history, our own biases, our home movies onto what the other person is saying, and true understanding becomes almost impossible.
Communication just bounces off or leads to misunderstandings.
Pretty much. To really connect, you need the courage to stop doing that,
Sure.
to pause your own autobiography and listen in a truly deep, empathic way.
Which means,
It means trying to genuinely see the world through the other person's eyes. Not just listening to their words, but trying to understand the feeling behind the words, the perspective, the paradigm, moving beyond just giving advice or trying to fix it.
yeah, that sounds hard. And it brings us back to that core finding, doesn't it? The vulnerability paradox. Why is empathic listening, which sounds so nice and gentle, actually considered risky?
It's risky, precisely because you open yourself up to be influenced. When you truly listen empathically, you are actively choosing to set aside your own certainties for a moment. You make yourself vulnerable to the other person's reality, their perspective, their feelings.
And if you really let that in,
It has to affect you. It might challenge your assumptions. It might change your mind. It might shake up your worldview a little. And that can feel threatening if you don't have a strong sense of inner security, that self-worth we were talking about.
so the paradox is perfectly clear now. To have real influence with someone, whether you're a leader, a parent, a partner, a friend, you first have to be willing to be influenced by them.
Yes, which requires understanding them deeply, and that understanding requires vulnerability from you.
And this is where those foundational habits you mentioned earlier come in, like the Covey stuff, habits 1, 2, 3.
Exactly. They provide the essential scaffolding for that vulnerability. Let's quickly recap them.
Okay. Habit 1 is be proactive, taking responsibility, choosing your response.
Right. Habit 2 is begin with the end in mind, knowing your values, your principles, your destination.
And habit 3 is put first things first, living by those principles and priorities day to day, managing your time and energy effectively.
Correct. When you've done that inner work, when you've built that changeless inner core based on proactivity and solid principles, you achieve that private victory.
That sense of self-mastery and integrity.
Yes. And that gives you the internal peace, the security, the strength to handle the outward vulnerability needed for empathic listening and genuine connection. You can truly listen to someone, even someone you disagree with profoundly, without feeling like your own identity is under attack. Your core isn't threatened by their perspective because it's anchored in something deeper.
Okay, so we've really established this link. Vulnerability equals courage, and that courage needs this deep inner character, the self-mastery. Let's connect that idea of daring greatly to, making a difference in the world, to acting with integrity.
Yeah, the research finding here, and it resonates with other work too, is that truly effective interaction, effective techniques, they really just flow naturally from who you are, from that independent, principled character.
Meaning you can't just fake it. You can't just learn some communication tricks.
Not really, not for deep connection or influence.
Yeah.
If your words and actions are coming from some superficial technique you learned, if it's about manipulation or just trying to manage impressions, people sense that. They feel the lack of congruence, the duplicity.
They sense the armor that Brené Brown talks about.
Exactly. That facade is the armor. And people won't trust it because the communication isn't coming from an authentic inner core.
Yeah.
It's performance, not integrity.
So character is fundamental. It's the bedrock for credibility, for trust, for real influence, and this willingness to show up authentically, even if it means facing criticism to be seen in the arena. That's really the historical definition of moral courage, isn't it?
It absolutely is. The research on vulnerability and shame is, in many ways, giving us a modern psychological language for something courageous figures have understood throughout history. Often the biggest risk isn't physical danger. It's the fear of public exposure, judgment, criticism, shame.
Can we look at an example? The source material mentions Sojourner Truth. Her advocacy took incredible courage. What does it highlight about how she challenged fear?
Yeah, looking at her address, I think it was to a group of black men in 1874. She wasn't calling for violence or physical confrontation. She was demanding they stop being passive out of fear.
Fear of what?
She basically called them out, urging them to throw off their fearfulness, to come forward in the name of the Lord and be active, useful members of society. She directly asked if their inaction stemmed from the fear of offending the whites.
Wow, that's confronting the paralyzing effect of shame and fear head on.
Absolutely. It's the essence of moral courage in this context. She was demanding they find the spirit of men, daring them to act, to speak up, despite the very real risks, criticism, backlash, even violence. Her message was pure vulnerability research, centuries ahead of its time. You must show up and be seen, even though being visible makes you vulnerable. That vulnerability is the necessary first step toward dignity and change.
It's powerful, and we see echoes of this emphasis on inner strength in Theodore Roosevelt's writings too, right? He talked about what makes a nation great.
He did. Roosevelt was really clear that national greatness wasn't just about military strength or physical hardihood. It required moral courage just as much.
And what did that mean for him?
It meant qualities like self-restraint, the capacity to work with others effectively, even when it's difficult. It's about maintaining your integrity and your principles, especially when things get complicated or contentious. That's moral courage.
That idea of self-restraint ties back directly to what we were saying about inner discipline, doesn't it? That dominion over self allows for the outward risk-taking, the daring greatly.
Precisely. It's that secure inner core again. It stops you from just reacting defensively every time you're criticized. It prevents you from lashing out when you feel exposed or vulnerable. It allows your vulnerability to be constructive, to build bridges, rather than just being raw, reactive, and potentially destructive.
So all this gives us a really strong counter-argument to that modern tendency to just armor up,
Yeah.
right? The idea that safety comes from being impenetrable, invulnerable.
Yeah, that's the exact opposite of what this research suggests. The whole point of the shame research is to help us take off the armor,
Right.
because we think the armor protects us from vulnerability.
But really,
But really, the armor is what cuts us off from everything we actually want. Connection, joy, love, belonging, authenticity. The goal is to get to a place where, as Brown puts it, worthiness has the power to set us free.
free from needing the armor.
Free from needing external validation, free from the constant fear of judgment, because you know your value is inherent. It's internal. It can't be given or taken away by others.
Which sounds remarkably similar to some really deep philosophical ideas about living an authentic life. Didn't Socrates talk about this?
He did. In Plato's Gorgias, Socrates argues that the ultimate goal for anyone in public or private life shouldn't be just the appearance of being good, but the actual reality of being good.
Being, not seeming.
Exactly. And that is, fundamentally, the ethical call of vulnerability. When you choose vulnerability, you choose reality over appearance. You're showing up as you actually are, flaws and all, instead of constantly trying to maintain some perfect-looking facade. You're risking the truth. And it's only in that reality, by embracing that wholehearted self, that genuine goodness, genuine connection can actually be built.
So we've really come full circle from that deep-seated fear of not being worthy to realizing that freedom comes not from proving our worth, but from having the courage to accept it and show up authentically. #tag outro. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, it feels like the core message is incredibly clear, even if it's challenging. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's actually our best measure of courage. It's the path to connection.
Right. And building resilience to shame, that feeling of not enough, is absolutely essential if we want to live what Brené Brown calls a wholehearted life.
And we have a real responsibility, especially as parents or mentors, to protect that sense of inherent worthiness in others, particularly children, focusing on behavior, not on attacking their core value.
Definitely. And maybe the ultimate reward for doing this work, for daring greatly, for engaging with vulnerability, is finding our own authentic purpose, our mission.
You're reminding me of Viktor Frankl here, his idea that we don't invent our missions in life.
We detect them, exactly, meaning isn't something we just pull out of thin air. It's already there, in the world, waiting for us to discover it through our experiences, our connections, our challenges. But finding it requires that ongoing, vulnerable process of self-reflection, honestly asking ourselves, what is life asking of me right now in this situation?
And if we don't engage in that process, if we avoid that vulnerable self-assessment because it's uncomfortable or scary,
Then we risk abdicating our responsibility. We risked just drifting. Frankl put it so powerfully. He said, man shouldn't ask what the meaning of his life is, but must recognize that it is he who is asked.
life is asking the question to us.
Yes, life poses the questions through our circumstances, our relationships, our choices, and we answer life through how we respond, through the actions we take, by being responsible for our own lives.
So the final thought for you, the listener, is maybe this. Are you actively engaged in that vulnerable process of self-assessment? Are you listening for the questions life is asking you and answering them with courage and intention?
Or is it possible that by avoiding the vulnerability required for that deep self-honesty and growth, you're not truly living your life, but just letting yourself be lived by circumstances, by fear, by the expectations of others? It's a challenging question, but maybe the most important one this research prompts us to ask.